Hey guys, I'm coming to you today to talk about a couple of things that might have been confusing about the lunar phases, and I just wanted to clear a couple of things up. This is a sheet that's actually from your workbook, and I wanted to show it to you. You can get it out and follow with me if you want. Remember, it's in that clear sheet protector in your binder. And I'm just going to read the little section to you, and then I'm going to review the image and explain why we see what we see from Earth. I know we did our lunar lollipops the other day, but I like this model because it shows us the direction. Remember, arrows and models show us the direction of movement. And I also love it because we know that the moon is illuminated. Half of it's illuminated from the reflection of light from the sun, and half is in shadow all the time. But that's not what we see from the Earth's perspective. We see the phases. And so the phases of the moon is what I'm going to read to you up here. Half of the moon is almost always in sunlight, but since the moon orbits Earth, you see the moon from different angles. The phase of the moon you see depends on how much of the sunlit side of the moon faces Earth. During the new moon phase, the side of the moon facing Earth is not lit. As the moon revolves around Earth, you see more of the lit side of the moon, until you see all of the lit side. As the month continues, you see less of the lit side. You can see the changes in figure 2. About 29 and a half days after the last new moon, a new moon occurs again. That's that recurring pattern that we were talking about in our target earlier. So what I love about this image is here we can see the sunlight. That big yellow arrow represents the sunlight. And that totally makes sense because look, that sunlight is hitting this side of the moon, and then of course this side is in shadow. So from the Earth's perspective, we see all of that shadow, and we call that the new moon. Now, as it continues to revolve around Earth, we see right here, look at that little line. This is the only part we see right there, and that is why we see a little crescent shape from our perspective. Doesn't mean that half of the moon's not still illuminated from the sun's reflection, but the crescent is the only thing we see from our perspective. Now it's called waxing because anytime it's growing in the amount of illuminated part of the moon that we can see, that's called waxing. Waxing means that it's growing in its size. Waning means that it's shrinking in its size. So here again, our dotted line, and we see why we see that first quarter moon, and it looks like half of it is illuminated from where we see from our perspective. And here, this is what we see. This is how we see that gibbous right there. That's that big illuminated area, and there's just like a little crescent-shaped shaded part. And of course, right here is why we see the full moon, because that sun's light is reflecting off of all of the half of the moon that we can see. Now, in your Ed puzzle that you were looking at, the Ed puzzle talked about why, because that was one of y'all's questions when we were in the classroom, then why, if the moon is right here, then why don't we have eclipses all the time? And based on one of your Ed puzzles, it explained to you that they're not in the same plane. The moon is tilted a little bit on its as it revolves around the Earth. So that's why it's not always in an eclipse. But that's why we see the full moon, is because the moon is kind of like dodging the Earth a little bit. It's raised up a little bit, and it can catch all of that sunlight. Then right here, that's where we have the waning gibbous. Still a gibbous because you have that large area showing, but it's waning because the lit area is shrinking. Here we have half of it lit that we can see. Looks like half of it, but it's actually the third quarter. Remember in class we talked about that's because if we divide this cycle into fourths, This would be 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So that's at the end of the 3rd quarter. Then right here, we see that little crescent, and that's why we see the waning crescent from our perspective on Earth. Now, when we go to label them, which we'll come back to here in a minute, when we go to label them or arrange them or order them in some way, it gets a little tricky. So we're going to start just like we started on the workbook page. We're going to start with a, what's that? A new moon. I wish you were here to talk with me. This is when I miss you the most because I'm talking to myself. So in the northern hemisphere, whenever we do the waxing or when we see the waxing phases, remember waxing means that it's growing in the lit portion. The lit portion is getting bigger. So when we see the waxing, we're going to start with the crescent because this new moon isn't always going to be, I mean, it's not going to go from no light to all light, right? We have to kind of ease our way. It gradually, the lit part grows. So in the normal sequence, we get here, we have the waxing crescent, and then the lit part is going to grow just a little bit more in our 1st quarter. Okay, so we have a little bit of illuminated portion, a little bit more, and we're still not going straight to the full moon. We have a gibbous, a waxing gibbous. So this is all of the waxing portion. Waxing means that the lit part, the part reflecting the sun's light, is growing in size. So a little bit more, a lot more, and then bam, full moon. Okay? So that makes sense. Waxing is when it's growing in the illuminated portion till it gets to where there's no more. I mean, it's at its max amount of sunlight being reflected. And now it's going to go into its waning portion. Okay? So its waning portion is the shrinking of the lit part. So a lot of you want to just go here. Well, that logically doesn't make sense, right? Because we're going from all lit to not a lot that's illuminated. So we have to gradually shrink, okay? Now the waning stages in the northern hemisphere, we're going to see those to the left. And so that we have a gibbous, a waning gibbous. And then of course it's going to become a little bit smaller lit portion. So that's a 3rd quarter. And then we're going to have the smallest little portion with the waning crescent. And then guess what? Because this is a recurring pattern, we would go here again. Okay? And then the pattern would repeat. So I just wanted to kind of go over how we know what comes next. And logically, how can we think about it? Well, because waxing is when the lit part is growing in size, and waning is when the lit part is shrinking in size. So we have, let's see if I can label them. Waning gibbous would go, quiz yourself, where would it go? Waning gibbous. It's shrinking right there. Gibbous is always the biggest lit portion other than the full. Okay, so that's waning gibbous. I'll do it like that because they're kind of big labels. Last quarter. Remember, the 3rd quarter can also be called the last quarter. 1st quarter, I know it's right here because it's in the waxing phase. Waning crescent. Oh, that's a crescent. Would it be that one? Did I get it wrong? No, I did not, because it's not talking about the shaded portion. Remember, we wanted to keep doing that on our lunar lollipop activity. When I walked around, a lot of people wanted to do that as a crescent. That's not a crescent, because remember, when we name the moon phases, we name them based on their illuminated portion, their lit part. Okay, so the waning crescent would be the actual lit crescent right here, and waning because that's the shrinking one. Waxing gibbous. Remember, gibbous is the big one other than the full moon, and it's waxing because it's in the stage where it was growing, right, in lit part. Waxing crescent. And we have new moon and full moon. Okay, now according to your eclipse Edpuzzle, remember that the new moon is where we can have a solar eclipse, because that moon blocks that sun. And then the full moon is where we can have a lunar eclipse because the Earth actually casts a shadow on the moon. So I just wanted to kind of revisit these phases and how we know in which order to put them in. We could totally do this same recurring pattern. Now y'all don't laugh at my son here, okay? But I have a son, all right? And I could do my new moon and my Earth. Don't laugh at my Earth either. And my Earth. See, I did that art just for y'all. And my Earth. And so I know that then I go to the waxing crescent, then the first quarter, then I need a waxing gibbous, and then I have my full. Then I'm going to need to do a waning gibbous, and my last or third quarter, and then I need my waning crescent. So this is where I'm growing the waxing phases until it gets full, and then these are my waning phases. So waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full, waning gibbous, last or third quarter, waning crescent, new, and then that pattern repeats. Okay? All right, I love y'all so much and miss y'all. Y'all have a good day. Don't forget to do the gizmo on eclipses. That's also an assignment for today, okay? Bye.